Hey guys, tonight we slip into the narrow, fog-choked alleys of a medieval city, not as a merchant, not as a monk, but as something far less welcome. You're a shadow in the gutter, a whisper behind the door, the reason someone might glance over their shoulder on a moonless night. You're an assassin. And spoiler, it's not the glamorous rooftop hopping life Hollywood promised. It's cold. It's miserable. And it usually ends with someone else getting paid for your silence. Right now, your boots are soaked through with muck, your stomach's empty, and your breath smells like stress and old onions. You probably won't survive this. Not because you're unskilled, though let's be honest. You're not exactly elite, but because the job is designed to chew up people like you. Quietly, efficiently, without fuss. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just slipped out of a fishmonger's shack that doubles as your current hideout. It smells like failure and fermented herring. Outside, mist clings low to the ground, curling around your ankles like a cat that doesn't trust you. That's fair. You don't trust you either. There's a dagger strapped to your belt. It's not elegant, it's not ceremonial, it's not even sharp on one side. But it's yours, and you're going to pretend that matters. The blade was probably stolen from a soldier too drunk to notice his sword went missing and was replaced with regret. You've spent the last 3 days listening through floorboards and bribing a kitchen boy with salted apples to map out your target's habits. He's a minor noble who thinks no one notices the way he leers at scullery maids. He'll be dead by midnight if things go right. They won't. Let's rewind. No one in your village grows up dreaming of becoming a killer. There were no little wooden daggers in the toy box, no bedtime stories ending with, and then he snuck in through the window and stabbed the Duke with honor and style. Assassination isn't a calling, it's a last resort. You didn't start here. You probably tried soldiering, or smuggling, or carving spoons even. But somewhere along the way life said, no thanks, and you ended up wearing a tattered hood and answering to strangers who slide coins across sticky tavern tables without making eye contact. Assassins in your world don't have guilds. There's no assassin clubhouse with grappling hooks and dramatic lighting. You don't meet in candlelit crypts to sip wine and compare poisoning methods. There's no guild badge. The only secret handshake you know is the one that checks for hidden blades before someone hugs you. You're not mysterious. You're barely tolerated. The town's population doesn't even look you in the eye. To them, you're either cursed dangerous or a walking omen. The local baker once dropped an entire tray of rye loaves when you walked in. The priest refused to give you last rites for a stubbed toe. You've stopped asking for help. You've stopped talking altogether, mostly. You live off crusts, rumors, and gut instinct. There's no home, just a rotation of places that tolerate your presence until someone goes missing and they don't anymore. Tonight's job was supposed to be simple, in and out, a clean slice, a quick exit, but you know better, because in this life, the first mistake is thinking there's such a thing as simple. You rehearse the path again. Back entrance, avoid the dogs. Second floor, study door, third candle on the left. You don't get blueprints. You get whispered gossip from drunks and illegible sketches drawn in ale. That's your intel. That and an unsettling sixth sense that something somewhere is about to go wrong. As you crouch in the alley, waiting for the bells to chime the 11th hour, you wonder what brought your target here. Not the noble. You, because when did your life become a checklist of paranoia and bad weather? Mainstream historians agree assassins existed in the medieval world, often employed in religious or political intrigue. But most weren't shadow warriors. They were expendables tools to be discarded quietly after use. Fringe accounts speak of poisoners who lived among apothecaries passing death in pouches of lavender and dried sage. Others suggest traveling performers occasionally doubled as killers, hiding blades among juggling pins. Historians still argue whether most so-called assassins acted alone or were part of larger networks. The records are deliberately vague because the point of a good assassin is that you're not remembered. You adjust your hood. Your fingers twitch near the hilt. In a few minutes, you'll either be richer bleeding or both. Most likely, you'll be forgotten. And as you blend into the darkness ready to climb that rain-slick wall and slip into legend, or at least into the next chapter, you remind yourself of one quiet, terrible truth. No one wants to be a medieval assassin, and that includes you. You inch forward through the fog, heart thudding a little louder with every step as if it's trying to warn you. We could have been a cobbler. We could have made sandals for monks. But no, here you are crawling past a wine barrel and a dozing guard who smells like onions and poor life choices. The castle wall looms above you, slick with moss and cold like a warning. You find the loose stones, the ones the kitchen boy described between mouthfuls of stolen honey bread. You scale them quietly, your body aching from weeks of sleeping on stone and running from things you'd rather not name. At the top, you crouch beneath a parapet, listening. The wind whistles through arrow slits like a ghost with somewhere better to be. From here, the courtyard looks oddly peaceful, like a painting, but you know better. Every flickering torch casts suspicion. Every shadow might breathe. You didn't ask to be here. You were born a second son, or maybe a fifth. It hardly matters. In medieval Europe, inheritance is a cruel game, and you weren't holding any of the good pieces. You tried the monastery, but the chanting gave you migraines. You tried farming, but your crops refused to grow out of sheer spite. And the military, you were told maybe next war. Eventually, your luck, or lack thereof, pointed you toward the only career path that didn't require formal training references or social standing. Just a willingness to disappear and never be hugged again. You don't get armor. Armor clinks, glints, and makes you sink like a rock if you fall into a moat. Your outfit is made of patchwork wool, dyed a shade of murky sadness, and smells faintly of cabbage. You keep everything tucked tight, your dagger, your silence, your regrets. Reaching the study window is easier than expected. That alone makes you nervous. No dogs barking, no startled guard stumbling in from the privy. Just a soft glow from within and the occasional scratch of quill on parchment. You slip through the cracked window and land silently like a sack of wet leaves. The noble sits with his back to you, scribbling something, probably a list of things he plans to complain about tomorrow. His life ends with a whisper, the kind you practiced for years, just enough pressure, a clean line, no sound. You catch him as he falls more for habit than compassion. You stay only long enough to confirm the job is done. Then you're gone out through the servants' passage, through a kitchen filled with half-eaten bread and clinking ladles, past a cat who stares like it knows your sins. You fade back into the alleys, the city swallowing you again. That's the best-case scenario. You survived. But survival's never guaranteed. Most medieval assassins weren't professionals. They were whoever could be bribed or blackmailed. Occasionally, someone with a talent for sneaking or stabbing would stand out, but most were just whoever was expendable that week. There's no fame in it, only risk. There's a myth that assassins had special guilds like the fabled Hashashin of the Middle East. And while groups like that did exist, Western Europe's hired killers were far less coordinated. They weren't given hash robes or mountaintop mansions, just vague directions and a promise they'd be paid after. Historians still argue whether many of these so-called assassins were hired at all or simply desperate people pushed toward violence by circumstance, then retroactively labeled to fit political narratives. You duck into a butcher's alley and catch your breath. There's a smell of blood, but it's not yours. You wipe your hands on your tunic, knowing better than to check for a pulse. That's how people get seen, and you cannot afford to be seen. Your fingers tremble slightly as you count the coins from your contact. Fewer than promised. That's expected. No assassin gets what they're owed. If you're lucky, you leave with your life and a few coppers to buy stale bread and a new pair of boots that don't squeak with every step. Sometimes you wonder if you're cursed. Other times, you wonder if this is what you deserve. You were supposed to be a nobody. Now you're a ghost who walks and sometimes leaves a trail. The city doesn't thank you. The sky doesn't clear. The noble's name will vanish from memory faster than yours. And tomorrow, if someone else disappears, you'll be blamed. Because in this job, even when you succeed, you're the villain in someone else's bedtime story. You're the flicker at the window, the whisper in the dark. The reason people sleep with a dagger under their pillow. You melt into the shadows, but they never quite take you in. Not fully. Even the darkness has standards. Your feet ache, not from running, not from climbing, but from tension. It's a peculiar kind of exhaustion, the kind that settles in your arches after hours of waiting for the worst to happen. You hunch in a loft above a tanner's shop, now your nose offended by every breath. The leather fumes burn your throat, but it's warm, and there's a wall at your back. That counts for something. You don't sleep. You rest your eyes in shifts 15 minutes at a time, always with one hand on the dagger. You learned early that the people who sleep too soundly in this line of work don't wake up in the same room they started in, or at all. You dream of simpler times selling eels, maybe, or sharpening sickles for tired old women who pay in bread and soft curses. Instead, you're here, eating dried beans, wishing they'd at least had the decency to come with salt. You think about the kill, not with pride. You're no artist, just a function, a tool. You think of how fast it was, how quiet, how completely forgettable. That's the goal, isn't it? A perfect job is the one no one remembers, not even you. You once tried to keep a tally, names, reasons, final words. But it became clear quickly none of it mattered. They blur together, a merchant here, a priest there, a knight too drunk to stand. What they had in common was that someone else wanted them gone. That was enough. Your hands tremble less now. That worries you more than when they did. You've stopped reacting to things that should horrify you. The stain on your tunic could be wine, could be worse. Either way, you just scrub it out with ash and move on. The body's way of saying, we've got other problems. There's a knock on the wooden slats below. You freeze. Not the guards, not their style. Too polite, too slow. No, this is someone else. Probably the client, or worse, someone pretending to be. You wait. 3 knocks, a pause, 1 knock. It's the signal. You breathe again, slightly. You slip down through the trap door and meet the contact. Cloaked, nervous. They smell expensive like rose oil and fear. They drop a purse into your hand without looking at you. You didn't see me, they mutter. You nod. Of course not. You've never seen anyone, that's the rule. Eyes on the ground, money in hand, mouth shut like a monk's vow. You pocket the coin, already thinking of the alley exit nearest to a bakery. You've earned a loaf today, maybe with crust. The contact hesitates before turning to go. Did he suffer? You shrug. What an odd question to ask a ghost. Sometimes they want you to say yes. Other times they want comfort. Either way, it's not your job to provide closure. You're not a priest. You're a broom sweeping away an inconvenient body. Your reward for this honesty, a life of solitude, suspicion, and the occasional boiled turnip. You've learned to blend in, to vanish between walls, to become as forgettable as mildew. And still, people whisper. They whisper because everyone fears the silent man in the corner, the one who asks no questions, who listens too well, who always seems to know a shortcut out of any room. You've been blamed for murders you didn't commit just because you were nearby. One time, a butcher's wife died of a fever, and the townsfolk swore they saw you walking near her home with a strange pouch. You were there to buy sausage. You moved cities after that. Mainstream historians acknowledge that medieval society was steeped in paranoia. Assassination wasn't just an act of violence, it was seen as a disruption of divine order. To kill a nobleman was to interfere with God's will, unless, of course, you were doing it on behalf of another nobleman. Then it was necessary. Some texts suggest hired killers were rumored to carry charms or curses, small tokens made of bone or ash meant to grant protection or mark a soul for hell. Historians still argue whether such tokens were actually carried or merely imagined by terrified victims and overzealous clergy. You've found a few of these charms on corpses before, always tucked into a sleeve or sewn into a hem. You leave them where you found them. Superstition doesn't feel so silly when your life hangs on shadows and secrets. You step back into the street. The mist is thicker now, swallowing torchlight, hiding your face. You like it that way. The fewer people who see you, the better. You pass a mirror in a shuttered shop. For a moment, you catch your reflection. You look normal. That's good. That's the idea. But sometimes you miss your own face, the one you had before you became this. Someone bumps into you, apologizes, doesn't recognize you. Perfect. You vanish again, your purse a little heavier, your soul unchanged. And still you wonder, how many more of these jobs? Until someone turns the knife around. Because in your world, there's only one rule. The quietest death is always the safest. And you're getting very good at being quiet. You're sitting in the rafters of an abandoned granary, now legs dangling just above a nest of rats, who are far too comfortable with your presence. One of them, bold, black-eyed and twitchy, keeps creeping up to your boot as if auditioning to be your sidekick. You consider naming him. Then remember, you're not allowed pets, or attachments, or anything soft, really. Outside bells toll the midnight hour. Somewhere nearby, someone's laughing, drunk, carefree, unaware that death passed just a few streets over. That contrast always gets you. Someone dies in a whisper, and 10 feet away life goes on with song and spilled ale. You chew on a hunk of bread that may or may not be older than you. It tastes like flour and disappointment, but you earned it. It's your reward for a clean kill, and more importantly, for not being dead yet. Sometimes you think about the people who hire you, their fine cloaks, their trembling hands, their smug little smiles when they imagine themselves powerful enough to erase someone with coin. They always think they're in control. You know better. Half of them will end up poisoned. The other half will end up broke and bitter. A few will try to hire you again. Fewer will live long enough to make that mistake twice. You once asked a noble why he wanted a man dead. His answer, He knows too much. You wanted to ask about what, but you didn't. The fewer questions, the longer your lifespan. Still, it stuck with you. Because in your world, knowing too much is a death sentence. And you know everything. You know which door creaks, which maid drinks, which guard forgets to lock the west gate on Tuesdays. You know where the bishop hides his flask and how to pick a lock with a splinter and sheer willpower. You know your city better than its mayor, and yet you are invisible in it. You don't leave footprints not because you're that good, but because you choose routes no one else walks. Rooftops, drain pipes, forgotten alleys that smell like mold and fear. You never use the same hiding spot twice. You sleep in barrel cellars, abandoned stalls sometimes, even in the rafters of churches. Once you spent a week pretending to be a mute monk just to avoid suspicion. You even faked the chance they weren't impressed. Mainstream historical records tend to gloss over just how many assassins were likely operating at any given time. That's because it's nearly impossible to track someone whose entire purpose is to vanish. The few who are mentioned tend to be tied to kings or scandals, usually framed as villains, occasionally martyrs. But fringe texts, odd letters, marginalia, and old ledgers paint a stranger picture. They suggest entire cities had their own quiet trades networks of informants and killers operating just beneath the tavern noise. Historians still argue whether these networks were real or just exaggerated local lore used to scare merchants into silence. You've seen the signs, though. A certain mark scratched on a post, a bundle of sage left on a door, a tilt of the head in a crowded room. It's not an official guild, but you recognize the pattern. You've even crossed paths with a few others. Never for long, never again. Assassins don't mingle. You might share a drink in silence, maybe nod, but you never exchange names. The moment you do, someone has leverage. Once years ago, you broke that rule. You told someone your name. They told someone else. Now that name is buried in a ditch outside of Rouen. Yours is a ghost that took its place. You stretch your legs and toss the last crumb of bread to the rats. They swarm it like nobility chasing gossip. You wonder if that's how you look, scrabbling for crumbs of dignity under the guise of shadowy professionalism. You pull your cloak tighter. The night's getting colder. Your joints ache in that quiet, persistent way that says you're not as young as you used to be. There's another job lined up. Of course there is. There always is. You get a whisper, a coin, a name, and then you vanish into the fog to make the world slightly quieter. But here's the truth that no one hiring you understands. Assassins don't retire. They just become a cautionary tale. And tonight, as you lean back into the hay and stare at a ceiling beam carved with someone else's initials, you wonder how your tale will end. Will it be a dagger in the ribs, a betrayal by a frightened client, a poisoned cup you forgot you left uncorked, or will it be silence? A night with no jobs, no whispers, and no weight in your coin pouch. Just a ghost finally too tired to keep haunting the world. The next morning drips in slowly gray and wet. You wake before the birds, your back stiff, your legs tangled in burlap sacks that itch like guilt. You stretch without standing. Experience has taught you that vertical movement before dawn is an invitation for regret. Instead, you stay low eyes, scanning the slatted roof of your temporary sanctuary, listening for footsteps, alarms, anything unusual. Nothing, just rain and the occasional groan of old timber. You slip out into the street like fog with knees. The baker's already up hurling insults at his apprentice. The town's waking, and you need to be someone else now. You pull your hood a little lower, adjust your limp to match yesterday's disguise, and walk like a man who belongs somewhere. That's the trick. No one suspects people who look like they have a destination. Your destination? A well, not for water, though you might drink. You've got a pouch to collect, a coin drop, payment for a job well done, and a name never spoken. The well isn't magic, but it might as well be. It takes in secrets and drops out silver. Sometimes. Today it does. You fish out a wax-sealed pouch with the elegance of someone retrieving a lost shoe. Inside 8 silver coins. Supposed to be 10. You're not surprised. There's a myth among those outside your world that assassins get paid obscene amounts. Gold, jewels, favors. In reality, you're lucky if you break even. Poison costs money. Cloaks don't patch themselves. Bribing a guardsman with a gambling problem still takes coin. Your work is expensive, not glamorous. Still, it's enough to keep you moving. And moving is surviving. You duck into a cloth merchant's tent and buy a new sash, not because you need it, but because the merchant is talkative, and having someone chatter at you while you pretend to care helps you feel not human, but less ghostly. He tells you the local magistrate has fallen ill. A fever, maybe poison. You nod. Pleasantly neutral. You didn't do it, but you're probably on the list of suspects anyway. You're always on the list. Your life is full of lists. Names to watch, places to avoid, faces to forget. One day you'll slip and confuse the wrong list. That'll be your last. You once kept a notebook, a little leather-bound thing with notes in code pressed between socks in a market trunk. You lost it during a storm in Lyon. You like to think someone found it and believed it was a diary of a madman. That would be fair. Mainstream historical accounts admit medieval urban centers had their share of unsolved disappearances. Whether by criminal enterprise or quiet political arrangements, people vanished. Occasionally, a scholar will stumble across a letter referencing a man in the shadows, or the whisper from Marseille. These breadcrumbs hint at something larger, an informal but persistent network of contract killings. Historians still argue whether this network was organized across regions or operated like a virus, spontaneous, adaptive, and terrifyingly contagious. You walk past a noble's procession, Polished boots, polished faces, horses who've eaten better than you this month. You keep your gaze low, your pace steady. One of them glances at you, just a flicker. Did he recognize you? Was he at the party 2 weeks ago? The one where the young lord tripped on poisoned wine, and his mistress wept over the wrong body? No, probably not. But you turned down an alley anyway, just in case. It's instinct, not fear. Fear is loud. Instinct is silent and sharp. It keeps you breathing when your body says panic. In the alley, a boy waits, maybe 13, wearing a tunic too clean for a beggar. He holds a rolled-up message in shaking hands. He doesn't speak, just hands it to you and scurries off. You don't read it immediately. You know better. Messages are cursed things. They carry promises and lies in equal measure, and both get you killed. Instead, you walk 3 more streets, slip into the rear room of a defunct candle shop, and unroll it under slatted light. 3 words. Her name's Eleanor. A job then. No details, just a name. That's always the first layer. If the client is serious, the rest will follow routine, location, preferred method, exit path. You burn the paper with the stub of a candle and crush the ash into the floorboards. Eleanor could be anyone, a spy, a threat, a liability, or just someone in the way. You don't judge, you just finish things. Once early in your career, you refused a job. A child no more than 7, heir to a minor estate. You walked away. 3 days later, someone else did it. Brutally, publicly. The client sent you a note afterward. Next time, do your job. There wasn't a next time, not for morality. Morality, you learned, was a luxury few could afford, and no assassin ever survives with both a conscience and a client list. And yet tonight, you find yourself wondering, who is Eleanor? And why does her name feel heavier than silver? The rain starts again by dusk, soft at first, like a drum roll muffled by wet wool. It taps gently on the roof tiles above you as you sit perched in an attic of a forgotten watchmaker's shop, studying the wax-sealed scroll that followed the name, Eleanor. Age early 20s. Lives in the merchant quarter, 3rd floor above the perfumery. No husband, no title, no guards, no explanation, no threats, just a name, a location, and a bag of coin delivered with unusual speed. That's what bothers you. The best assassinations, the ones that come without fuss, shouldn't feel this tidy. When something's too clean, you start looking for the blood that's been wiped away. You cross-reference the address with your own crude map. You've drawn it yourself over the years. City blocks, alleys, crawl spaces, blind corners, charted with the desperation of someone who has to disappear at a moment's notice. You update it obsessively. It's your only possession. You've never been willing to trade, sell, or burn. You've walked by that perfumery before. Expensive place. Always smells like crushed roses and arrogance. The kind of shop people enter when they want to pretend they're better than they are. You've never gone inside. You've never had reason to. Until now. You wait until well after curfew before moving. Your steps are careful, deliberate. You change your gait again. This time, you walk with a slight hunch and uneven step, the limp of a chimney sweep, who fell once and never quite recovered. In a pouch at your hip is a thin vial of amber liquid, poison technically, more like a suggestion of death. You brewed it yourself from dried roots, a sliver of mold, and something that might have been part of a beetle. It smells like regret and works best in warm wine. That's Plan A. Plan B involves a blade and an exit plan so narrow you'll have to turn sideways just to breathe through it. You scout the building first. 3 exits, 1 dog, 2 windows with ledges wide enough for standing, a neighbor who waters her herbs at the worst possible hour. You climb the back wall using drain pipes and stubbornness. At the 3rd-story window, you pause listening. There's movement inside, not footsteps, something softer. The rustle of fabric, the sigh of someone brushing their hair. You slide the window open with a touch, testing for squeaks. None. Either the hinges are oiled or someone else used this route recently. You step inside. The room is small but warm, filled with candles and the scent of lavender. It feels lived in. Books on a shelf. A cat curled on a cushion. A shawl draped over the back of a chair like someone just stepped away for tea. And there she is, Eleanor. She isn't startled. She doesn't scream. She looks up at you with steady eyes and says, "You're late." You freeze. Not because you've been caught, but because she knew you were coming. Close the window. She says, like you're a guest letting in a draft. You do. She motions to the chair opposite hers. Sit, if you like. I imagine this is awkward for both of us. You've heard of this kind of setup? A decoy, a trap, a noble playing games. You grip the edge of your cloak. She notices. If I were here to kill you, I wouldn't have left the window open. You don't speak. You're not sure what words would help. I know what you do, she says quietly. I asked for you. Your brows knit. You never take requests from the target. I didn't hire you to kill me, she says. I hired you because someone else did. The poison vial suddenly feels much heavier at your side. You'll get the full coin, she adds. You've done your part. You showed up. That's all I needed. This is a test. Has to be. Someone close to me, she continues, thinks I know a secret. I don't, but I know they think I do. You say nothing. You've never been trained to respond to targets who think too much. I'm not asking you to protect me, she says. That would be optimistic. I just wanted to see the one they chose, to know if I had a chance. Mainstream historical records rarely mention assassins who disobey. The story always ends with a dagger in the dark, a clean kill and exit, vanishing into legend. But not all contracts were fulfilled, and not all killers remained killers. There are whispered accounts, letters, confessions that suggest some assassins spared their targets either for payment sympathy or something more dangerous, conscience. Historians still argue whether these stories are romantic embellishments or rare flickers of humanity in a brutal profession. You stand, she doesn't flinch. That's either bravery or exhaustion. You leave without drawing your weapon. She watches you go. Back in the alley, you breathe, not deeply, just enough. You're not sure what just happened. Mercy, weakness, wisdom. All you know is that tonight Eleanor still breathes, and you do too. But one of you just became very inconvenient for someone with coin, and the other is going to have to keep running. By morning, you've put 3 districts between yourself and Eleanor's perfumed apartment. Not because you're afraid, though you probably should be, but because this city doesn't forget a broken contract. Someone out there paid for her to stop breathing. She didn't, and now the math doesn't add up. You find shelter in the cellar of an abandoned bathhouse. Damp stone walls, mildew, a colony of spiders that keep to their corners. You don't mind them. They mind their business. More than can be said for most humans. You light a stub of tallow candle and stare at the flickering flame like it owes you an explanation. Why didn't you finish the job you've done worse? For less. You've ended lives for a slice of bread and a night's safety. What made this different? You keep asking as if the answer will suddenly crawl out of the wall like one of the cellar's spiders and whisper, "It's guilt." But it's not guilt, not really. It's clarity. Eleanor knew. She knew someone was coming, knew how the game worked, and for a moment, just a moment, she made you feel seen, not as a ghost, not as a tool, but as a person. That's dangerous. You've spent years building a life where your face is forgettable, your voice rarely heard, your name erased like chalk in the rain. Someone seeing you, that's a risk you can't afford. You lie back against the stones and stare upward, half expecting the ceiling to fall. It doesn't, not yet. Instead, you remember your very first job. It wasn't clean. It wasn't smooth. It was a mess of bad timing, shaky hands, and too much blood. Your target was a merchant, arrogant, petty, and very much deserving of a comeuppance, or so you were told. You didn't ask questions. The coin was heavy and new. You were young and stupid. You broke into his home, misjudged the guard rotations, and barely made it past the family dog, which incidentally bit your left hand so hard you couldn't hold a spoon properly for 3 weeks. But you finished it, somehow, clumsily. And when you crept back out into the night, bloodied and bruised, the street had never looked darker, or quieter, or lonelier. There was no applause, No whispered congratulations, just silence, and the faint realization that you'd never truly sleep the same again. Mainstream historians agree that medieval assassinations were messy affairs more often than not. The idea of a clean surgical kill was mostly fantasy. Most assassins weren't expert swordsmen or alchemists. They were just desperate people with sharp objects and little to lose. Some fringe documents mention apprentice killers, usually failed soldiers or orphaned boys taken in by crime lords taught to kill not with elegance but efficiency. Historians still argue whether the stories of elite killers trained in secrecy were based on real people or just exaggerated retellings designed to frighten the ambitious. You still have the scar from that dog, a jagged little crescent just beneath your thumb. Most wouldn't notice it, but you do. Every time you reach for a blade, every time you tighten a bootstrap, every time you wrap a bandage that isn't yours. It's a reminder no one is invincible, not even the invisible. You decide to move again. Staying in one place too long makes you an easy mark. And after what happened with Eleanor, someone will be looking. Probably multiple someones. Some curious, some furious. All dangerous. You make your way through the back alleys, keeping to the shadows. You blend in like smoke. You pass beggars, lovers, monks. None of them see you. That's good. That's safe. At the market, you lift a satchel of dried apples from a distracted vendor. You're not proud, but hunger doesn't negotiate. You toss a coin into the mud behind you as payment, a small mercy. The vendor will never know it came from the man who stole from him, and maybe that's the most kindness you can afford these days. Later, in the courtyard of a crumbling chapel, you watch a group of children playing with a stick and a hoop. Their laughter echoes off stone like something sacred. You remember being that small, barefoot, muddy, certain you'd live forever. You lean back against the wall and let your eyes close for just a moment. Not sleep, just stillness. In the distance, a bell tolls. You know what that means. Another death, another job completed. You're just glad for once it wasn't yours. But it could be, because someone paid for Eleanor's death. And now, someone might be paying for yours. Night falls again, as it always does, quietly, without apology. The city exhales its last bits of warmth, and the wind that moves through its streets now carries something sharper, not just cold. Expectation. You don't sleep tonight. Instead, you sit in the rafters of a ruined stable on the southern edge of town, legs pulled to your chest, eyes flicking toward every sound, owl, cartwheel, voice, or footstep. You've felt this before. That prickling sense along your spine that says someone's watching, even if they're not ready to show themselves yet. Eleanor is still alive. That changes things. You broke a contract. Not explicitly, technically. You didn't sign anything. But in this world, your reputation is your signature. The people who hire you don't care if you vanish after a job. They just care that the name whispered in taverns delivers results. Clean, final, without complications. And now, you've introduced the worst complication of all, mercy. You don't regret it. That's what scares you. So you wait. Because that's all you can do. At some point past midnight, you spot movement along the main road. 3 figures, fast, coordinated, wearing mismatched cloaks but all too quiet for casual travel. You recognize the rhythm, hired blades. Maybe not for you, maybe not yet, but their presence feels like a warning etched into cobblestones. You slide back deeper into the stable, your breath tight and shallow. Time to relocate again. You move through back streets that reek of fish guts and old ink, past broken windows and doors that don't close anymore. You pass a woman singing softly to herself while she stitches a torn tunic by lantern light. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. You're a shadow. She's a flicker. You both understand how fragile the night is. Eventually, you find a tavern cellar with a loose grate and slip inside. It's dry, quiet, smells like spilled wine and old barley. Better than most of your beds. You curl up behind a stack of empty crates and try to piece together your next move. There's no going back to Eleanor. Not now. Maybe not ever. You helped her. That alone was reckless. If she's smart, she'll leave town and never look back. But you know better. She's not running. She's watching, waiting, calculating, just like you. And somewhere out there, the person who ordered her death is already writing a new name on a piece of parchment. Yours. Mainstream scholars often treat assassins as isolated entities, blades for hire, who live apart from the societies they impact. But in truth, their actions rippled through local politics and economics more than most realize. A single assassination could change trade alliances, unsettle inheritances, or shift the balance of an entire council. Some fringe records describe a phenomenon known as mirror kills, when an assassin once contracted to take a life becomes the next target in a deliberate purge of all loose ends. Historians still argue whether this pattern was the norm or just a recurring symptom of the profession's cutthroat nature. You lie still in the dark, letting the facts settle like dust. Someone paid to have Eleanor killed. You refused. Now someone else will be hired, maybe to finish the job, maybe to clean up your failure. You're not afraid of death. You've lived with it too long for that. You're afraid of being forgotten for the wrong reasons, of being remembered as sloppy, weak, a man who blinked when it counted. And worse, you're afraid they might be right. Your thoughts are interrupted by a familiar sound, bare feet on stone, soft, careful, too careful. You draw your dagger with one hand and press yourself flatter against the wall. The grate above shifts. A figure drops down silently, cloaked, hooded, small. You strike first. It's instinct. Elbow pivot, blade to neck. But you freeze just as the steel touches skin. Wait, the girl whispers. It's not Eleanor. It's younger, smaller. I am here to warn you. You pull the blade back a hair, but you don't lower it. They're coming, she says. 3 of them, one tonight, the others soon. You narrow your eyes. Who sent you? She hesitates. The woman with the herbs. She said you spared her. You swallow the rising tension in your throat. Eleanor, of course. She said, if you're willing to break the rules for her, you're worth warning. You nod once, it's enough. The girl vanishes the same way she entered, like smoke. No name, no payment. Just a warning passed like a torch in the dark. You're not sure what Eleanor is playing at, but one thing is now certain. You've become a liability, and in your profession, liabilities don't last long. By dawn you're gone again, not just from the tavern cellar, but from that part of the city entirely. You leave no note, no sign, just an imprint in the dust and a faint smell of candle wax. You move with the caution of someone being watched, because now you know you are. The 3 Eleanor mentioned are real. One came last night, the other 2 will follow. You don't wait around to greet them. Your new hiding place is a bell tower under repair. It's high exposed and smells like bird droppings and rusted iron. But it has only 1 staircase up and perfect sight lines across 2 quarters of the city. That's worth the risk. You sit behind an old crate filled with cracked hymnals counting coins and rations. 8 silvers left, 2 good apples, half a flask of water. You could last a few days on this, maybe. But survival now isn't about hunger. It's about information. You have no client, no job, no direction, and worst of all, no certainty. You've become the story, the loose thread, the reminder that even the best blades can slip, that reputations can rot like fruit left in the sun. You feel it already. Whispers in taverns, a glance held too long, a gate guard you've bribed before now refusing to meet your eye. You're becoming that kind of famous, the kind that ends with a knife between the ribs and no one bothering to ask why. You need answers, so you do something you haven't done in years. You go to church, not to pray. That would be hypocritical even for you. But because churches are information hubs, monks gossip, priests trade secrets for favors, confessionals are the original spy network. This one is small, crooked, and smells like beeswax and mold. A priest recognizes you but wisely says nothing. You drop a coin in the alms box and slide into the back pew. You wait. Eventually, a man sits beside you. He doesn't look at you. Neither of you speak for a long moment. Then he says, "You broke a rule." You respond without moving. "I broke a contract." Same thing, he replies. You know him. You've never used his name. He's the middleman, the one who takes coin from the desperate and turns it into a job for people like you. He wears a priest's robe, but his real faith is in leverage. I need a name, you say. You need a grave, he answers almost kindly. You smile. I'm already halfway there. He sighs, as if tired of you before you even arrived. It was one of the houses, merchant-born. Wants her gone because of inheritance. She's not the heir. She's the threat. Wrong blood, but right charm. Too many people like her. Makes the wrong brother nervous. Of course. Power always plays the same game. She knows you ask. She suspects. That's enough. You lean in. How many others have been offered the job? 3. One already tried. I met her, you say. She was polite. He chuckles once, dry as the chapel air. The next one won't be. You pass him a coin. He lets it sit on the pew between you like it's a shared sin. Don't follow me, he says, standing. You don't. He walks to the altar, lights a candle, and disappears through a side door. Not into the street, but through the old tunnels beneath the church, where prayers are traded for silence. And no one ever asks how a priest knows so much about knives. Mainstream history books like to keep the sacred and profane in neat boxes, church and crime light, and shadow holy and unholy, but the real Middle Ages were far more tangled. Many clerics held secular power. Some even sanctioned violence or looked the other way when it was convenient. Fringe records include letters between abbots and nobles arranging divine justice in the form of quiet disappearances. Historians still argue whether these cases were real conspiracies or just the natural byproduct of power playing dress-up in robes. Back in the bell tower, you write her name again in the dust, Eleanor. Then beside it a new name, Marcus of Gray Hill. Probably the one who paid. Probably the one who won't stop until she's gone or you are. You stare at those two names and weigh the cost of interfering again. Because here's the truth. No one tells you about being a killer. The first time you spare someone, it haunts you. The second time, it changes you. And the third time, you stop being what they hired. You become something else. You don't know what you are now. But you do know one thing. If Marcus sent others, it's time to send them a message back. You don't leave the bell tower right away. That would be too easy. If you were being watched, and you're nearly certain you were then staying still, might be the only move that makes you invisible again. You sit in silence until the bells begin to groan with the weight of the coming hour. Somewhere below the city begins to stir slow and clumsy, like a drunk trying to remember where he left his shoes. Marcus of Gray Hill, a name that tastes like copper and ash. You've heard it before, always on the edges of stories. A merchant turned noble fat with trade and debt in equal measure. Bought land. Married well. Paid for titles he didn't earn and silenced rivals who dared to remember the truth. It makes sense now. Eleanor isn't just a risk to him, she's a mirror, a reminder that some people climb without stepping on corpses. And that terrifies men like Marcus. You have a choice to make. You could disappear. Let the next assassin do the job. Let the world turn its wheel and pretend you were never involved. Or you could make a very loud point very quietly. You choose the second. There's a saying among your kind, never leave a trail unless you want them to follow it. So you do something stupid. You write a note, not in your hand, of course. You mimic the script of a scribe you once robbed, careful to curl the letters just enough to suggest a noble's assistant trying very hard not to be caught. You write your coin failed. She lives. I'm watching. Then you tuck the note into the folds of a plum-colored ribbon, a merchant's color, expensive, but not royal. You found it clinging to a broken crate near the spice market. The detail matters. It makes it feel personal. You slide the message under the back door of Marcus's city home. Not his estate. That's too well guarded. The townhouse, his in-town retreat, has softer defenses. A bored guard, a tired maid, a cellar door no one checks twice. You vanish again before the parchment touches the floor. It's not about intimidation. It's about clarity. You want him to know that his business has become your business and that you're not some faceless blade, not anymore. Then you disappear not into an alley, but into the crowd. You walk openly now, hood down, cloak loose, face exposed just enough to feel the sun sting your cheek, and still no one sees you. Not really. Assassins aren't invisible because of magic. They're invisible because people don't want to believe someone like you exists. It's easier that way. You spend the afternoon watching Marcus's townhouse from a rooftop nearby. You see the messenger arrive. You see him escorted inside, then sent out again much faster than he entered. Panic. That's good. People make mistakes when they're afraid. By nightfall, the second assassin makes his move. You see him before he sees you, tall, gaunt, moving with the exaggerated stealth of someone who's trying too hard. You recognize the mark on his glove, Saltborn, a group you've heard of but never met. Allegedly expensive, allegedly loyal, allegedly lethal. Allegedly, you intercept him before he reaches the perfumery. You don't kill him. You do something worse. You trap him. It takes timing, of course, and a bit of borrowed wine to distract the alley guard. But eventually, he finds himself in a locked wine cellar with a blade to his throat and a dozen burning questions behind his eyes. You know who I am, you ask. He nods. Slowly. Then you know why you're not dead. Another nod. This one with sweat. You'll tell Marcus this. He gets one warning. Just this one. The next person he sends doesn't come back. You lean in closer, just enough for him to smell the iron on your breath. And if you come back, He shakes his head. A fast panic tremble that tells you he'll take the hint. You leave him tied but breathing. Someone will find him by morning, probably after the wine runs out. Mainstream history likes tidy stories, heroes, villains, justice served in neat chapters. But real history, the kind that lingers in dusty corners and old cellars, is made by people no one remembers. People like you. Sometimes assassins shaped kingdoms, not with armies, but with decisions. One spared life, one delivered message. One body not left in the street. Historians still argue whether these moments were acts of strategy or accidents of mercy. You return to the perfumery one last time, not to warn Eleanor, not to protect her, just to see. Her window is lit. She's reading, alive. And in that moment, you wonder if it's enough. You turn back to the rooftops, back to the dark, back to a life you no longer recognize as yours. But it's yours anyway, because assassins don't get retirement. They get silence. And tonight, for once, the silence feels like a choice. You sleep finally. Not deeply and not for long, but it's the first time in days your eyes close without twitching at every creak in the rafters. You wake before dawn. The dream you were having slips away like fog underfoot. You think it involved a garden, a real one, green things growing, the kind of place that smells like mint and damp earth, not iron and fear. You sit up slowly. Every joint in your body complains like it wants a refund. You roll your neck, stretch your arms, check your weapons. Still there, still yours. Your breakfast is a hard heel of bread, a bit of salt and water that tastes like the inside of a copper coin. The bread cracks your tooth. You chew anyway. You've survived worse. Today you make your way to the outer wall of the city. Not to leave yet, but to think. To watch the merchants arrive through the gates. To study the rhythm of the city like you're reading its pulse. It's a little trick you learned long ago. Watch how a place breathes. If it stutters, something's wrong. Today it stutters. Too many guards, too many nervous glances. Someone's waiting for something or someone. You'd bet coin it's you. You slink back into the alleys and head east toward the Dye Quarter. It's loud there, colorful, chaotic, perfect for disappearing. You move through clouds of red and blue pigment, pretending to cough like everyone else, and take a moment to blend into a group of apprentices arguing about lye burns. You duck into a curtained stall that sells old books and dried ink. The owner, a blind man named Vico, nods without looking. He is one of your few constants. Never asks questions, never tells lies. You hand him a folded scrap of parchment. He touches it briefly with calloused fingers, then says, "Wait." You wait. 10 minutes later, a small boy delivers a message to the back of the shop. Vico hands it to you without comment. You open it carefully. Inside one name, Elias of Orvale, another assassin. Not a threat yet, but soon. You sigh, pressing your fingers into your temples. Marcus is getting desperate. Elias is known for clean kills and cleaner exits. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't give warnings. If he's coming, Eleanor won't survive the week. And you, if Elias finds out you were the reason his job failed, before he'll finish yours before hers. So, you plan. First you track him. Elias favors southern roads and river routes. You find a boatman who remembers him. Tall, smelled like myrrh and funeral linens. Paid double. Didn't talk. Sounds about right. You follow that thread down the river path until you find a marker scratched into a tree, an old signal you recognize from your earliest days. A symbol that says, "Passage taken." 2 days ago. You're getting closer. You double back through the woods, cut across a sheep path, and reach an abandoned mill that serves as a waypoint for people like you. People who don't want ends or questions. You step into the mill and hear it, the faint rhythmic scrape of a whetstone. He's already here. Elias, you don't charge in. That's suicide. You sit just outside, crouched low behind a cartwheel, and listen. The scraping stops. Then a voice smooth and deliberate. "I wondered when you'd show up." He knew. You step out, slowly. He's seated on a broken barrel, cleaning his blade like he's polishing a church bell. His face is calm, bored even. "You broke the rule," he says. "I made a choice." He nods like that's worse. "I was told you'd be a problem." From Marcus. From everyone. Of course. You take a careful step forward. "Don't bother," he says. "I'm not here to kill you yet." You freeze. He sheathes his blade, stands, stretches his neck like he just woke from a nap. "She's still alive?" he asks. You nod. He sighs. "Pity. I like this cloak." You know what he means. A failed job leaves a mark. Not just on your record, but on your skin, your tools, your name. Why accept the contract, you ask? He grins. "Because I finish what others fumble." Fair enough. "But maybe I'll wait," he adds, stepping toward the door. "Watch what you do next. Maybe you'll fix it. Maybe you'll prove you're still one of us." And then he's gone, not running, just walking into the mist like someone who knows the forest better than the map. Mainstream history rarely chronicles conflicts between assassins. Those who study power tend to focus on the rulers who fall, not the shadows who bring them down. But among certain criminal archives and oral traditions, there are legends of crosses, moments when two blades are pointed at the same target, or each other. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect real feuds or just mythologized echoes of a profession that preferred anonymity to glory. You stare after Elias for a long time. He's not a threat today, but he will be. unless you give him a reason not to be, unless you end this fast, which means one thing. It's time to meet Marcus of Gray Hill, face to face. Marcus of Gray Hill's estate sits just beyond the city's northern gate, a stretch of manicured land pretending not to remember the swamp it once was. A manor of brick and plaster with pointed windows and guards who carry pikes, mostly for decoration. It's the kind of place where roses bloom unnaturally bright and everyone pretends not to hear the screams from the wine cellar. You've cased the place before, once for a client who wanted a ledger stolen, once again for a client who wanted Marcus dead, but never followed through with the coin. That was years ago. The guards have changed. The building's grown fatter, but Marcus hasn't. He's always been the same, a man whose enemies vanish, whose parties glitter, whose words drip like syrup over a poisoned tongue. Tonight, you walk right up to the front gate. No shadow games, no rooftop leaps, just a man in a dark cloak tapping politely on the iron bars. The guard squints. You recognize him, Roth something. Used to gamble at the Brass Tavern, lost 3 fingers in a brawl, and never forgot a face. Problem, he asks. You smile. Tell Marcus I'm here to discuss Eleanor. He doesn't move. You hold up a coin, not to bribe, to show. It's not ordinary currency. It bears a private seal Marcus once used on discreet contracts. You kept one, just in case. Roth stares, then mutters, "Wait here." He disappears. You wait, hands, visible weapons, untouched. Every second is a gamble. Then the gates creak open. You're led through manicured gardens full of hedges trimmed into smug little animals, past fountains pouring water over stone figures that pretend not to bleed, into a hall lined with tapestries and too many candle holders. Marcus waits in a side chamber, sipping wine from a goblet carved like a lion's mouth. He doesn't stand when you enter. Of course not. You look terrible, he says cheerfully. You paid for worse. He grins. I always appreciate efficiency. You've come to finish the job then. No, you say stepping forward. I've come to cancel it. He tilts his head. That's not how this works. It is now. He sips. You broke the contract. Do you think I care about her? No, you reply. You care about your name and your silence. He nods slowly. Correct. And that's why she must go. She's not talking, you say. But I am. He raises an eyebrow. To whom? To people who still hate you, and there are plenty. Marcus laughs soft and easy, like he's humoring a child. You think threats work on me? He says. I have half this council in my pocket. I buy priests like bread. I hire 3 killers before breakfast. You take one slow step forward. Then why are you so nervous? The laughter fades just for a second. You lower your voice. You hired 3 assassins, One failed, one backed off, one is watching. You're running out of shadows. He doesn't answer. You set the seal coin on the table between you. One more job, you say, and it's you. Not tonight, not even this month, but eventually. You pause, let the silence spread like fire under the floorboards. Unless you let her go. He studies you like a man choosing between poison and wine. Mainstream history often reduces confrontation to battles and scrolls. But power shifts happen quietly too in private chambers between clenched teeth and narrowed eyes. There are records sparse and coded of moments when death was paused by logic, not mercy. Historians still argue whether these tense negotiations between killers and king's merchants and blades ever changed the course of history. But the gaps in the chronicles, those silences often say more than the pages. Finally, Marcus leans back. "You'd make a good merchant," he mutters. You shrug. Too honest. He downs the rest of his wine. "Fine, I'll let it go. But if she opens her mouth, she won't, you say, and neither will I. And if I change my mind, you smile. Then we both disappear. But only one of us gets a choice." He waves you off like smoke. "Get out." You do, but not before glancing once over your shoulder to make sure he knows you will come back if he gives you a reason. Outside, the air is cleaner than you remember. The wind carries a scent of jasmine from the edge of the property. Somewhere beyond the city waits. So does Eleanor. You walk until you're past the outer wall, past the lights, past the last breath of Marcus's domain. Then you vanish again. No shadows this time, just purpose. Because for the first time in a long time, you've said no and lived, and you plan to keep it that way. You don't go back to Eleanor. You want to, but you don't, because seeing her again would make things real, tangled, risky in a way even poison can't touch. And you've survived this long by never caring too deeply about who lives and who doesn't, especially if they live because of you. So instead, you disappear into the city like ink into water. You change your route, your gait, your entire rhythm. You abandon the places that used to welcome you, the butcher's alley, the boarded bathhouse, even the safe house above the tannery where you kept an emergency cloak, a rusty sword, and an old apple core you kept forgetting to throw out. From now on, you're nowhere. You're no one. Again. But the silence is different now. Heavier. Before you faded into the cracks, because that was the job. Now you're hiding from the fallout of something far more dangerous than a failed kill. You chose. That's the part that sticks with you. You weren't ordered. You weren't trapped. You made a decision, a real one. And the ripple it left is still spreading through every boot step you take. You try to take a job, any job, to ground yourself. You visit a contact in the candle quarter, a man with too many teeth and not enough eyebrows. He always has work. But this time he shakes his head before you even speak. "You're trouble now," he says. "Too many people whispering your name." You move on. At the mill gate, another fence turns your way. "Not safe," she mutters. "Not for you or for us. You're being shut out, not by enemies, by your own." Assassins don't fear death. They fear isolation. Not the kind that keeps you alone, but the kind that makes you visible, unprotected, untrusted. And worst of all, predictable. You've broken an unspoken rule. You didn't just spare a target. You told the world you might do it again. That makes you unreliable. And in your profession, unreliable gets carved into your skin with steel. You hole up in a ruined bell foundry on the west bank just beyond the fishmonger's row. No one comes here anymore, not since the fire. It's perfect, quiet, abandoned, smells like scorched metal and wet bricks. You build a fire, eat what's left of your supplies, try to ignore the hunger settling in behind your ribs like an unpaid debt. And then you hear it, a knock, soft, purposeful, 3, then 2, a rhythm you haven't heard in years. You don't move, you let the silence stretch. Then a voice, "I'm not here to fight." You blink, because that voice quiet, measured unmistakably tired, is Eleanor's. You open the door. She's cloaked damp from the mist and holding a satchel of bread-dried fish and apples that look better than anything you've eaten this week. "I figured you wouldn't eat unless someone made you," she says. You take the food without a word, sit by the fire. She joins you, her presence somehow both comforting and infuriating. "I'm not here to thank you," she adds after a while. "Good," you mutter. "I wouldn't believe it anyway." She chuckles. "I'm here to say I'm leaving. That gets your attention." "I'm going west," she says. Coastal town. Quiet. I know someone there. Maybe I can start over. You nod slowly. That's smart. "I wanted to see your face before I go," she says. "To remember the man who didn't kill me." You look away. "I don't want anything else from you," she adds. "But if you're ever tired of being a ghost," she leaves the sentence hanging. You let it hang. Mainstream historians rarely discuss the aftermath of unsanctioned decisions by individuals like you, because officially you don't exist. But in whispered circles, among fragmented journals and half-erased letters, there are stories of assassins who vanished for good. Some say they became mercenaries, others monks. A few lived quietly, married, farmed, wrote poetry under different names. Historians still argue whether these stories are wishful fictions or evidence that even shadows sometimes step into the light. Eleanor stands. "I won't wait," she says. "I know." She leaves you with the satchel a nod and no goodbye. And somehow that's worse than if she'd kissed you or slapped you or wept. You sit there for hours chewing stale bread and thinking about a garden that may or may not exist. Because maybe, just maybe, the assassin's story doesn't always have to end the same way. Not with blood, not with silence, but with the choice to stop being a ghost. The days blur after she leaves. You move through them like smoke, never settling, never seen. You keep your head down, your hood up, your weapon sharp. You make camp in forgotten corners, the empty garret above a crippled bookbinder's shop, the hollow beneath a carpenter's stairwell, even once in the rafters of a bathhouse chapel, listening to old women hum prayers as steam curled through the air like incense. Each time you stay no longer than 2 nights, just enough to rest, just enough to not be caught. And still you feel it, the noose tightening, not from Marcus, not even from Elias, from the others. The network that once sheltered you is growing cold. Doors that used to creak open stay bolted. Faces that once looked up with cautious respect now vanish into the shadows before you arrive. You're not one of them anymore. You've done what few ever dared. You broke the rhythm, spared a life, stepped out of the role written for you in blood and whispers, and assassins, for all their shadows, run on rules. You broke them. So now you walk alone. You try to find work again, something small, something clean, not a kill, just information, escort, delivery. But your name has changed shape. It no longer inspires fear or respect. It inspires doubt. The last person who hires you gives you a package to deliver to the docks. Simple enough. You make the drop, collect the coin, and find out 3 hours later the package was empty. A test. And you failed, not because you opened it, but because you didn't ask what was inside. They were watching. You spend that night in a ruined pigeon tower, the wind howling through shattered beams like laughter. You don't sleep. You don't eat. You stare at the city lights below and wonder if you ever belonged here at all. Mainstream history loves its clear lines. The killer, the target, the aftermath. But the middle, where doubt festers, where choices are made quietly in filthy attics, that part rarely makes it into books. Some fringe sources' letters between informants or whispered warnings etched into stone suggest that the worst fate for an assassin wasn't death. It was being cut off, forgotten, disowned by the very underworld that once paid them. Historians still argue whether these banished figures became legends or just unmarked graves in muddy fields. One night you see Elias again. He doesn't speak, just stands across a busy street watching you from beneath a hood that doesn't quite hide the scar beneath his eye. You don't run. You don't draw your blade. You just wait. After a moment, he nods once and disappears into the crowd. It's not forgiveness. It's not threat. It's something else. Recognition, maybe. You've stepped off the path, and somehow he understands that now. You've become a third thing, not one of them, not one of the dead. something else. You spend the next week preparing, not for war, not for revenge, for escape, not just from the city, but from the identity that's wrapped itself around you like a second skin. You gather coins, safe routes, and names of distant towns where no one whispers, where people die of old age instead of knives in the dark. You consider stealing a horse but decide against it. Too loud, too visible, too much like something the old you would do. Instead, you trade your last blade for passage on a merchant cart, leaving at dusk. The merchant doesn't ask your name, just shrugs and says, "Sit in the back, don't snore." You do. The city fades behind you brick by brick, whisper by whisper, and ahead, fields, open sky, roads with no names. For the first time in years, you let yourself imagine it. A life that isn't stolen, a day without calculation, a future where your death isn't something you plan for in advance. You won't live forever, you know that. But maybe, just maybe, you'll get to choose how it ends. And for someone like you, that's more than enough. The road out of the city is rough, in places rutted muddy, lined with trees that lean just a little too close. The cart creaks beneath you, carrying bolts of dyed cloth, and one very silent, very tired former assassin. You sit on burlap sacks, wrapped in a borrowed cloak that smells like cinnamon and sweat, and watch the tree line blur by. For once, there's no destination, just distance. You're not fleeing, not exactly, but you're not going back either. The merchant doesn't ask questions. You don't offer answers. It's a good arrangement. He hums tunelessly as he drives a rhythm that steadies your pulse. A reminder that not all lives are built on secrets and blades. Some are stitched together with trade dust and the hope that the next village might pay slightly more than the last. You pass hamlets and way stations. Chickens peck at roadsides. Children chase dogs through fields. At one stop, a stable boy offers you water. Not out of fear, just kindness. It throws you. You thank him awkwardly and wonder how long it's been since you've said thank you without a knife hidden behind your back. Eventually, you part ways with the merchant at a crossroads lined with ancient stones and mossy milestones. He nods once like you're just another traveler and drives on. No suspicion, no caution, just a man doing his job. You walk, for days, maybe more. You follow river paths, old hunting trails, and broken bits of Roman road where the moss grows thicker than the memories. You pass shrines to forgotten saints' fields dotted with sheep hills that roll like sleeping giants. You sleep beneath trees in abandoned chapels beside crumbling watchtowers that once warned villages of raids long faded into legend. The quiet is strange at first, then addictive, and still You can't shake the feeling that someone is following you. It's not paranoia, not entirely. You catch glimpses of figure on a distant ridge, a horse's print beside yours that wasn't there the night before, a broken twig too clean to be a deer's doing. You keep walking. You don't confront it. Because if it's Elias, he'll make himself known. And if it's not, it doesn't matter. You're not that person anymore. Not really. You come to a town built along a lazy river, its streets cobbled from mismatched stones, and its houses painted cheerful colors that don't quite match. It smells like fish bread and early morning fog. No one recognizes you here, and for the first time, that doesn't feel like a loss. You rent a room above a baker's shop with the last of your coin. It's small, clean, faces west. The floor creaks in a comforting way, like it's sighing in time with your own breath. You sleep, and this time you dream, not of knives or alleys or names scribbled on parchment. You dream of Eleanor, not the woman you spared, but the idea of her, the choice she offered. A life where your hands didn't always smell like metal and fear. You wake with the sun on your face and a decision in your bones. You won't run forever, but you also won't kill again. Mainstream history rarely records what happened to the men who vanished after their final assignment. The ones who didn't die, didn't betray, didn't burn. There are scattered mentions: an unnamed gardener in a foreign court who once deflected a dagger before it was thrown. A tavern keeper in a fishing village who never missed a step when danger walked through the door. A monk whose calligraphy matched the handwriting of a long-dead poisoner. Historians still argue whether these figures were just coincidences or men who stopped being ghosts. In the town square, a notice board carries messages from nearby farms. They need help, not with killing, with fences, with herding, with hauling water from the spring that's run dry again. You read the notes slowly. One catches your eye. Help, wanted, orchard maintenance, room board, and peace. You tear it down and smile, because maybe that's all an assassin wants in the end. Not redemption, just room, board, and peace. The orchard is 2 miles outside of town, tucked into a low valley, where the morning mist clings to the trees like a forgotten story. The path there is little more than a dirt ribbon worn down by years of wheel ruts, boots, and hooves. It winds past stone walls stacked by hands long gone, and pastures dotted with lazy cattle who regard you with vague cud-chewing curiosity. When you reach the gate, you hesitate, not because there's a threat. There's none. The only blade in sight is the sun catching the edge of a scythe leaning against the barn. No, you hesitate because part of you still expect this to be a trap. The farmer, a woman near 50, with strong arms and a face carved by years of wind and work, meets you at the fence. She looks you up and down, doesn't ask your name, just gestures toward the shed. "You know how to mend a fence?" she asks. You nod. Good. Start there. Supper's at sundown. If you stick around a week, I'll teach you how to graft apple branches. If not, no hard feelings. It's more hospitality than you've had in years. So you stay. You don't talk much, neither does she, but it works. You fix the fence, carry buckets, shovel compost with a kind of satisfaction you didn't expect. The work is honest, the ache's earned. You sleep in the loft above the barn, wrapped in an old wool blanket that smells faintly of cedar and hay. At night, the wind rustles through the trees like a lullaby made of leaves, and for the first time in longer than you can remember, you wake without instinctively reaching for a weapon. On the fourth day, you hear a rider on the road. You keep working, but your ears go sharp. The horse stops near the gate. A voice calls out. Not a threat, not urgent, just casual. Looking for some help, it says. The farmer steps out. They talk. You listen. It's not about you. It's about a broken wheel, a lost goat, a few crates of spoiled apples. No one's hunting you. Not here. Still, you don't sleep that night. You lie awake, counting breaths, listening for footsteps that never come. Old habits die hard, and yours were forged in blood. The next morning, you decide to make something. Not a trap, not a weapon. A bench. Simple, sturdy, placed under the largest apple tree at the edge of the orchard. It takes you most of the day. Your hands blister. You curse once or twice. But when it's done, you sit. Just sit. And it's enough. Mainstream history tends to forget men like you, the ones who walked away, the ones who survived their own past and didn't need an audience to witness it. But there are stories passed down in small towns about quiet strangers who arrived with hard eyes and calloused hands, who worked without complaint, who never told their whole story but always paid their debts. Historians still argue whether these tales are simple folklore or if they're all about the same person passed along like a candle flame, flickering but alive. Weeks pass. The farmer teaches you to prune branches for winter. You teach her how to silently open a door without creaking. She doesn't ask where you learned it. You don't offer. Sometimes you catch your reflection in the rain barrel. You still look like a man who's seen too much, but now you also look like a man who's done seeing it. One day, while gathering wind-fallen fruit, you find a small bone charm tangled in the grass. Old habit kicks in. You snatch it up, check for symbols. It's harmless, probably left by a child. Still you pocket it, because part of you knows you're not done watching your back. You may never be, but you're not walking it alone anymore. The farmer calls you in for stew. You go. And when the wind howls outside the shutters that night, you don't tense. You sleep, not deeply, but without fear. And for someone like you, that's more precious than peace. It's permission to live. Winter rolls in without ceremony. The first frost comes overnight, icing the apple trees like brittle lace and painting the edges of the world in quiet silver. You wake early, your breath blooming white in the cold barn air, and for a moment you forget where you are. Then the smell of hay, the creak of the barn rafters, and the soft snort of the cow in the stall below ease you back into the present. You survived another season. You go about your tasks with sleeves rolled and fingers stiff from the cold. Chop wood, break ice on the trough, patch a roof shingle blown off in the night. The routine grounds you. It's a rhythm, a pulse, not unlike the one you once found in alleyways and shadowed corridors. But this one doesn't come with a body count. The farmer watches you sometimes, not with suspicion, with curiosity. You know what she sees. A man who works too quietly, moves too smoothly, and always notices where the nearest exit is. But she never asks, and you never tell. Until one night, when the stew is thick and the cider burns pleasantly down your throat, she says, "You ever kill anyone?" You don't flinch. You just say yes. She nods. Thought so. Then she passes you more bread and talks about mending harnesses. And that's the end of it. Mainstream chronicles skip over this part of history, the mundane, the after. They're obsessed with climax, with conclusion, with who stabbed who and where. But what happens to the dagger after it's dropped? Who does the killing after the last page turns? Some fringe journal's record-passing mentions of former soldiers who became weavers or spies who taught arithmetic. There's even a record of a grave digger in Kent who once matched the description of a long-missing political assassin. Historians still argue whether these were coincidences or simply the parts of the story too quiet to bother preserving. You've grown a beard, not for disguise, just laziness. Your hands are rougher now, the calluses thicker, but the blade in your belt still fits your grip like an old regret. You haven't drawn it in months, and yet it stays sharp. Not because you expect to use it, but because you remember what happens when you don't. One morning, just after the first snow, a boy arrives from the village, thin, blue-faced, desperate. There's been a robbery. The village storehouse grain gone, a man hurt. They need help. The kind that comes fast and carries weight. The farmer looks at you. You nod once. You ride into town on a borrowed horse cloak, pulled tight, hood up not to hide, but to focus. Old instincts stir like restless wolves. The villagers recognize you, not your name, just your walk, your eyes. They point you toward a trail, a set of wagon tracks, too deep to be local. You follow them through frost-cracked earth and brittle brush up into the old ridge paths where the pines lean like sentries. You find the camp before sunset. 2 men, one armed, one asleep. No guards posted. Amateurs. You could kill them both in under a minute, but you don't. Instead, you wait, watch, learn. Then, when the armed one steps away to relieve himself, you strike, not to kill, just to knock him down. You bind his wrists, gag his mouth. The other wakes up to your blade hovering near his nose. They don't fight. They're just hungry, desperate. They didn't mean to hurt the villager. The wound was an accident, a scuffle gone wrong. You listen, then nod, and bring them back. No blade drawn, no blood spilled, just rope silence and the look in your eyes that says, "You were lucky. I'm not who I used to be." The village takes them in, punishes them, but not cruelly, just enough to send a message, just enough to give them a chance to be something else. Afterward, you sit in the tavern with hot broth and no questions. Someone offers to pay you. You shake your head. You didn't do it for coin. You did it because it was the right thing. That's a new feeling. It doesn't sit easily, but it sits. You return to the orchard the next day, wind in your face, snow on your boots. The farmer asks, "All good?" You say good enough, and she nods, because she knows that's as close to peace as someone like you ever gets. By midwinter, the orchard sleeps beneath a blanket of frost, each tree a skeleton in the snow. The work slows, the world quiets, and in that hush you begin to notice things you hadn't before, like how the wood creaks differently depending on the wind, or how the farmer hums off key when she's baking, or how you no longer startle when someone says your name aloud, even though it's a new name, borrowed from the edge of a map, given freely by a man who no longer exists. You don't miss your old name. You're not sure you even remember it, but you remember what it felt like, heavy, sharp, like a blade you never meant to carry. Some nights you dream of the city again, of narrow alleys and flickering torches, of Eleanor's face at the window, of Marcus sipping wine with a smug, untouched smirk. You wake with your fists clenched and your breath ragged, but you wake, and that's enough. You've taken to walk in the orchard at night, not to patrol, not to protect, just to breathe. There's something about the cold that sharpens the world. The stars feel closer. The air tastes cleaner. The silence feels earned. You find yourself thinking about all the things you never learned to do, how to laugh without scanning the exits, how to hold a hand without calculating leverage, how to trust someone with your back turned. You're still not sure if those things are possible, but you think you'd like to try. One evening after supper, the farmer brings out a small box. She sets it between you without ceremony. "Yours," she says. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Found it tucked in the rafters. Been here a long time. Thought it might belong to someone like you. You open it slowly. Inside a set of lockpicks. finely crafted, oiled, balanced. Your fingers remember the weight before your mind does. There's also a coin, old tarnished, bearing a faded symbol you once swore you'd never carry again. And beneath it all, a note. It's not addressed to anyone, but it's meant for you. If you're reading this, you either quit or you won. There's no signature, just a smear of old wax. You close the box gently. The farmer doesn't ask. She just sips her tea and says, "Winter's almost through." You nod. Because spring will come. The trees will bloom. The work will return. And with it, the question, will you stay? Mainstream history rarely records the quiet retirements. There are no chronicles for the man who lays down his blade, no monuments for those who choose anonymity over ambition. But in oral traditions, in tavern songs and borderland stories, there are whispers of killers turned shepherds, mercenaries turned midwives, blades for hire, who buried their daggers beneath roots and never looked back. Historians still argue whether these tales are fantasy or forgotten truths. But the soil remembers, and sometimes so does the wind. You carry the box to the edge of the orchard and bury it beneath a tree whose roots twist like old bones. No ceremony, no words, just a choice not to forget what you were, but to stop letting it define what you are. The next day, the sun breaks through the frost for the first time in weeks. The snow melts in little puddles around the base of the trees, and somewhere in the branches, a bird dares to sing. You chop wood, carry buckets, feed the animals. When evening falls, you sit beneath the old tree where you left your past buried in a wooden box, and you let yourself imagine a future not full of peace, but full of possibility. And for a man who once traded names for coin, that's a future worth waking up for. Spring doesn't arrive all at once. It tiptoes in on muddy boots and crooked sunlight. The snow recedes, reluctantly pooling in shaded corners like secrets that haven't finished thawing. Buds emerge. The wind loses its bite, and the orchard begins to breathe again. You find yourself doing the same. There's more work now. Pruning branches, clearing deadfall, checking saplings for frost damage. You rise before dawn without needing to be called. You go to bed with sore arms and a quiet mind. It's strange. In the city, that kind of routine would have been a prison. Out here it feels like a rhythm you never knew you needed. You don't carry a blade anymore, at least not the old one. You still have a small knife for pruning, for trimming, whittling, and the occasional stubborn knot in a bundle of rope. But it's different. It doesn't live in your sleeve. It doesn't hum with the weight of death. You carry it like a tool, not a threat. And still your instincts haven't faded. You feel the shift in the air before you hear the footsteps. You're in the lower grove gathering fallen limbs for kindling when you sense it, a presence, not hostile, not familiar, just near. Then a voice behind you, low, steady, amused. I wondered if it was true. You turn. It's Elias. Of course it is. He stands just off the path, hands, empty eyes, scanning the orchard like he's checking for traps. He looks the same, a little older, a little more tired, but still wrapped in that same impossible calm, like a man who never runs because he always knows where you'll stop. You don't reach for anything, neither does he. After a beat, you say, I thought you'd be dead by now. He smirks. You're not the only one who changes professions. You gesture toward the trees. Welcome to retirement. He glances at the basket of kindling in your arms. You look terrible. You grin. I sleep better. He nods, slowly, taking it all in. Word got around. Marcus is quiet now. Your name's mostly been buried. No one's hiring to kill you anymore. You raise an eyebrow. And you came all this way to deliver the news. I came to see if the rumors were true. That you walked away. You nod once. I did. He looks at you for a long moment, then sits on a nearby stump like it was placed there just for this conversation. Most of us don't get that choice, he says. No, you agree, we don't. But you did, he adds. You shrug. Only because I broke enough rules to make myself useless. He chuckles. Same. You sit across from him, the basket resting on the ground between you like a peace offering. The silence isn't tense. It's reflective. Two ghosts in daylight. I won't stay long, he says. Didn't come to disrupt anything. Just wanted to see you before I head north. Heard there's work building roads past the mountains. You tilt your head. Shovels instead of daggers. Still sharp, he says. But they leave better marks. Mainstream accounts rarely document the chance meetings of men who once lived in shadow. But the legends persist of blades crossing paths long after their final strike of rival assassins, sitting down over a shared fire and remembering what it was like to be feared, forgotten, and finally free. Historians still argue whether these stories are embellishments, but every now and then a village outpost or road crew list will show a man with no last name and an uncanny ability to hear danger in the wind. You and Elias sit until the sun dips low, painting the trees in gold. When he stands, he doesn't offer a handshake. Neither do you. That was never your way. But he nods. I'm glad you lived, he says. Me too, you reply, and mean it. He vanishes down the road like smoke, like always. But this time, you don't follow. You walk back to the house with the basket full of kindling and a strange sense of closure riding on your shoulders like a second cloak. That night, you build a fire in the hearth, not because it's cold, just because it feels good. The farmer doesn't ask who the visitor was. She just passes you a mug of tea and says, tomorrow we start cleaning the irrigation channel. You smile. Sounds like a plan. Because now, finally, you can plan things. You can imagine tomorrow. You're not a ghost anymore. You're just a man. Spring gives way to summer in slow, golden waves. The orchard comes alive, thick with bees, fragrant with blossoms, and heavy with the promise of fruit not yet ripe. The sun rises early and lingers late, stretching the days until they feel weightless. You work from morning to twilight. The air is filled with the soft thump of apples dropping too early, the distant whinny of the farmer's horse and birds, singing in languages older than history. You find peace in the repetition, checking roots, mending troughs, tying branches back with care. Your hands are rougher now, your back stronger, your scars the same, but they don't ache as much. They don't define you. You're no longer watched, hunted, whispered about in shadowed alleys. If the world still remembers the assassin you once were, it has stopped acting like it cares. Sometimes you still hear a name on the wind, Eleanor Elias Marcus, but it fades quickly, like smoke dispersing before it can sting the eyes. You've begun to forget what it felt like to have a mark. One morning, while repairing a fence post that gave up during the last rain, you find yourself whistling, not deliberately, not skillfully, just whistling. You stop as soon as you realize, startled by the sound of your own contentment. Then you laugh, because it's ridiculous and because it's true. You're happy. You've built something here, not just shelter, not just routine, a life. A fragile one held together with wood glue calluses and silence, but yours. The farmer notices, too. You're not brooding as much. She says one evening, handing you a mug of cider. You raise an eyebrow. I brooded. You reeked of brooding, she says, sitting beside you on the porch steps. Now you just look like a man trying to figure out how to sleep with sore knees. You sip the cider. I'll take that. A pause. Then she says, what would you do if someone from your old life showed up again? You consider the question, but not long. Depends who it is. And if they needed help, you glance at her. Then I'd decide if I was still someone who could give it. She seems satisfied with that. Mainstream historians are often puzzled by the silence that follows certain names. Men and women who appeared in records for years, scattered across reports, rumors, royal decrees, and then simply vanished. Some believe they died unremarkable deaths. Others suggest exile, imprisonment, or assumed identities. But the boldest fringe theory suggests they left willingly, that they found a way out not through violence or vengeance, but through obscurity and new purpose. Historians still argue whether that's possible. After all, can a person truly leave behind a life soaked in blood and expect peace? You think so, because peace isn't something you earn. It's something you protect once you've finally found it. One evening, a traveler arrives at the orchard. He's young, thin, wears a blade he clearly doesn't know how to use, says he's looking for a man with a certain description yours years ago. You meet him in the field, hands empty, shoulders calm. You're looking for a ghost, you say. The boy frowns. He owes someone coin. He owes a lot of people things, you reply, but he's not here. The boy watches you for a moment, then nods. If you see him, I won't, you say, but I'll let him know. He leaves. You don't follow. Instead, you sit beneath a tree heavy with green apples. Wipe your brow and bite into one that's just starting to sweeten. Tart. Crisp. Honest. You close your eyes and listen to the wind moving through the branches, and for the first time you realize you've stopped looking over your shoulder. You're not hiding anymore. You're choosing this, and no one, not Marcus, not Elias, not even your younger self, can take that from you now. The summer deepens. The orchard hums with 1,000 quiet tasks. Bees murmur through clover. Apples swell heavy on the branches. Chickens mutter to themselves like gossips too tired to care who hears. And you just keep showing up every day, like the sun, like the weeds. There's comfort in the routine. Wake, haul water, check the trees, mend what needs mending, sharpen tools, eat when you're hungry, sleep when you can, repeat. There's a rhythm to it, a life with no daggers, no contracts, no maps drawn on stained parchment, just days, and you still breathing. You learn to cook. Poorly at first. The farmer teaches you how not to burn stew and how to bake bread that doesn't double as a blunt weapon. You take notes in your head, not on parchment, but in gestures, smells, textures. You also learn the names of trees, not just apple and pear, but Baldwin, Pippin, Russet, each with its own needs, moods, and fruit that ripens on its own time. You're starting to do the same. Then one day a letter arrives, folded neat, no seal, delivered by a traveler who doesn't know who it's for, just told to hand it to the man with the orchard eyes. It's a message in 5 words. I kept my promise too. No name, no signature, but you know, Eleanor. It hits you differently than you expect. Not with longing, with relief. She lived, not just survived, but lived. You sit with the letter for a long time. Fold it, unfold it, fold it again, then tuck it into the corner of the barn wall behind a knot in the wood where no one looks. Not to forget it, just to know it's safe. You don't write back. She didn't ask for a reply. Mainstream history doesn't document these moments, the aftermaths, the quiet affirmations that life continued after violence, that 2 people who spared each other's deaths also gave each other a future. But every so often, buried in letters in village ledgers or the back pages of an almanac, you'll find a phrase, a sentence that doesn't fit the context. I made good on it. He kept his word. She lived. Historians still argue whether these were messages from survivors or simply misfiled notes. But they echo nonetheless. The season shifts. You feel it in your bones before the leaves begin to turn. A tension loosening, a pace slowing. You've now been here longer than anywhere else in your adult life. That realization makes you sit down. You look at your hands, scarred, calloused, strong, and you smile because you never planned to stay, but you did. There's a festival in the village soon. The farmer invites you to go. I'm not good with crowds, you say. She shrugs. They're not good with you either. Should be mutual. You laugh and then say yes. You help set up lanterns, carry kegs, carve a goose so badly someone offers to take the knife from you before tragedy strikes. Children chase each other between stalls. Old men shout about whose cider is stronger. A fiddler plays a tune you remember from some long-ago tavern, but this time it doesn't end in blood. Someone asks where you're from. You lie gently. A border town. Sheep and barley. They believe you. And why wouldn't they? You believe it too. Later that night, you sit by the river with a cup of cider and your feet in the water, watching the stars blink on one by one. And you wonder, not in fear, but in awe. How did I survive? You know the answer. You chose to. And that's the only kind of survival that lasts. The apples ripen faster than expected. The trees are heavy, with fruit branches sagging like old men with too many stories to tell. Each morning, you walk through rows of green and gold, the scent of summer, giving way to the sharper tang of fermenting sweetness and dry grass. It's harvest time, and harvest is not a poem, it's labor. You rise before the sun's shoulders soar before you even start. You climb ladders, hoist baskets, and spend hours twisting fruit from branches until your hands ache and your forearms are freckled with sap and sun. And you love it, because for once everything you pull from the world gives something back. Each apple is a small success, tangible, immediate. You don't have to question the ethics of it or whether it will come back to haunt you. It's just there. Crisp, honest, whole. You're not used to that. Neither is your body, but it's adapting. You're stronger than you've ever been, not in the way you were trained to be quick and quiet and deadly, but in a sturdier, quieter way. The strength of someone who builds instead of breaks. You work alongside the farmer, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. The conversations are rarely deep, but they carry weight. You thinking of staying through winter? She asks once. You don't answer right away, not because you're unsure, but because you realize the question doesn't scare you. Maybe you say, and mean it. You notice over the next few days, she starts saving scraps of wood. patching holes you hadn't seen before, preparing for something longer. You think she's giving you space. You think she hopes you'll fill it. One evening, after a long day of hauling crates to the barn, she hands you a wrapped bundle. Early winter gift, she says. Go ahead. You open it. Inside a new cloak. Thick, wool, hand-stitched with seams reinforced for travel or staying put. There's no dagger pocket, no hidden sheath. You run your hand over the lining. I figured it was time, she says, for something that wasn't meant for running. You don't know what to say, so you just nod. Mainstream history often forgets to mark the moments of rebuilding. After the war ends, after the blood dries, what then? What becomes of the men and women who were only trained to end things? In some oral histories, especially those from small villages or border towns, there are stories of strong, quiet strangers who show up just before harvest. They work hard, say little, sleep with their boots near the door for a few months, and then one day they put the boots away. Historians still argue whether these are legends, metaphors, or simply truth. No one bothered to write down properly. You begin to write now. Nothing formal, just notes, lists, bits of memory carved into scraps of bark corners of feed sacks, the backs of receipts from market vendors who still insist your name sounds fake. You write about the trees, about the river at dawn, about the way your hands look when they're covered in honest dirt instead of someone else's blood. You don't know why you're doing it, but it feels right. Maybe one day someone else will find the words. Maybe not. That doesn't matter, because for the first time, you're not writing down who to kill. You're writing down how to live. You walk the orchard at dusk, the light going gold, the air smelling of wood, smoke, and apples. You think about what it took to get here. Every lie, every blade, every time you didn't say goodbye because you didn't think you'd need to. And you realize something. You're no longer running from what you were. You're running toward who you might become. And it's not too late. The frost returns without knocking. One morning, you step out to feed the chickens and find the grass brittle with ice, each blade a tiny sword shimmering in the early light. The orchard, once bursting with color and fruit, stands bare and quiet, leafless silhouettes against the slow gray sky. You tighten the new cloak around your shoulders. It's heavier than your old one, but warmer. It doesn't swish when you move. It doesn't hide weapons. It doesn't need to. The work has changed. Now it's about preparation, digging trenches for runoff, clearing dead branches, sharpening tools, not for blood, but for bark, and stacking wood. So much wood, you chop for hours at a time. The rhythm is meditative. Axe, crack, lift, breathe. No one chases you here. You sleep deeply now, not because you're safe, but because, for once, you're not afraid of what you'll wake up to. Sometimes the farmer catches you staring at the horizon as if waiting for a horse to appear in the distance. She doesn't ask questions anymore. She just hands you tea and says, "The goats are probably stuck in the bramble again." She's almost always right. The winter market's open in the village. Small stalls, lots of root vegetables and poorly tuned flutes. You go with her once. The butcher nods at you like you always lived here. The baker offers you an extra roll just because. A child runs past and smacks into your knee. You reach to steady them, and they don't flinch. That moment stays with you. You walk home carrying a bag of potatoes and a carved wooden whistle the farmer clearly bought for you, though she pretends not to know how it ended up in your pocket. Mainstream history usually ends when the action does. The battle is won. The tyrant is dead. The assassin disappears. But there are stories, fragments really, of quiet returns, of men who once shaped history, choosing instead to shape fences. One scholar translating an obscure monastery ledger noted a line about a silent man who arrived during frost and never left. Historians still argue whether he was anyone important. But that monastery still has its walls, and someone kept them standing. One night, snow begins to fall. You stand in it for a while, just watching. You think of Eleanor, of the orchard she might have found, or the coast, or the desert. Wherever she ended up, you hope it has warmth and something green. You think of Elias, whether he's digging roads, living under a new name, or back in the shadows, doing what he does best. And you think of Marcus. If he's alive, he's still dangerous, but distant. Like thunder on a mountain, you no longer climb. You no longer check for traps at the door. But you still sleep with your boots nearby. You're not foolish. You're just better. The farmer catches you staring at the fire that night and asks, "Do you miss it?" You don't need to ask what she means. You shake your head. "No, but it's in me. Like smoke in old wood." She nods. Smoke doesn't go away, but it doesn't mean you're still burning. You chuckle. "When did you get so poetic?" She shrugs. "Lived long enough to get bored of silence." That night, you write again. Not in code, not on scraps. You take a real sheet of paper bought in the village and write a letter. You don't sign it. You don't need to. It says, "I stayed." You don't send it. You tuck it into a book on orchard care, between grafting diagrams and notes about pest rot. Someday, someone will find it, and maybe, just maybe, they'll understand. You rise early the next morning, your breath curling in the cold, and step outside to greet the day. The orchard is still, sleeping, but not dead, like you, and spring will come again. You're certain of it. Winter deepens. Days grow short, nights stretch long, and the cold becomes a constant companion, settling in your bones like a story you've heard too many times. Snow blankets the orchard, now smoothing the rows of trees into silent white waves. The branches reach upward like frozen hands, bare and still. There is less work to be done, but somehow more weight to each task. You split logs, patch holes in the barn wall, help hang lanterns to keep the wind from tearing through the eaves. Most of it is just trying to stay ahead of time, trying to prove you belong in a world that no longer asks you to prove anything. Sometimes you fail. You wake in the middle of the night with your hand wrapped around a blade you don't remember grabbing. You still walk the perimeter out of habit. You still flinch at sudden movement, even when it's just a fox skittering past the coop. But you recover faster now, and you sleep again. The farmer notices. She never says anything directly, but she starts saving the end pieces of bread, your favorite, for your bowl. And when she passes your room at night and hears you moving, she knocks once, not to ask, just to remind you someone's there. You've learned to live with the quiet, which is why it surprises you so deeply when the knock comes. Not her knock, not the boy from the village, not the wind pretending it's something more. A real knock. 3 raps, measured, calm. You're at the door before you even realize you've moved. You don't draw a weapon. You just open it. A man stands on the porch, middle-aged, weathered, dressed too well for the cold, too plain for a noble. His eyes scan you like he already knows what you are. "I need help," he says. You stare at him. "Yeah, you got the wrong house." "I don't think I do," he says, pulling a scroll from beneath his cloak. He hands it over. No emblem, no wax seal, just a name at the top. Not your name, but hers, Eleanor. You open the scroll slowly. It's a map, rough, charcoal on parchment, markings around a small village near the borderlands, and 3 words beneath it, taken, still alive. You feel the heat rise in your chest, the cold around you forgotten in an instant. "Who are you?" you ask. "A courier," he replies. "She said you might not come, that you've left all this behind." He looks you over again. But she also said, if you did come, it would matter. You say nothing. Just close the door. Mainstream accounts rarely detail what happens when someone leaves their past behind and it comes back anyway. We imagine clean breaks, fresh starts. But some ties aren't undone by silence. Letters surface. Messages are carved into fences. Deaths echo. Historians still argue whether those called back into conflict ever truly leave again, or whether their peace was only a pause. You sit by the fire, the map in your lap. You stare at it like it might vanish. The farmer returns from the barn, snow in her hair. She sees your face and says nothing, just waits. After a long pause, you say, she's in trouble. She nods. I figured. I don't want to go, you admit. But you sigh. She matters. Another long pause. Then she says, you have a coat now, and better boots than you did last year. You smile, but it fades. Because this is a choice again. And the thing about choices is they don't always stay buried. You rise, pack light, take the new cloak, the pruning knife, a length of rope, a flask. You leave behind everything else. As you shoulder the satchel, the farmer asks, "You coming back?" You hesitate, then say the truest thing you can eat, "I hope so." Outside the snow falls steadily, soft, relentless. You step into it, boots crunching as the wind picks up. The road calls, not with vengeance, not with violence, but with the quiet weight of a promise made long ago. You head toward the horizon, leaving behind a fire that will still be warm for a while yet. And if luck holds, so will your place by it. You travel light and move fast. The snow-covered roads wind through valleys and past frozen rivers each step forward, pulling you farther from the life you built and deeper into a world you tried to forget. Gone are the warm barn mornings, the wood smoke, the sound of chickens grumbling in the straw. Now it's just you and the cold and the map. You sleep under trees or in crumbling way stations back always to the wall dagger, never more than a breath away. You forgot how easily it comes back, this muscle memory of survival, of moving like a ghost. Your feet find the silent paths. Your hands trace for pressure plates and doorways, even when you know none are there. But this time, it's not about a coin purse or a contract. It's Eleanor, the one you didn't kill, the one who saw you and let you live anyway. You pass through towns without giving a name. No one asks. The roads are too empty, the taverns too tired. People talk less in the winter, and you're not the kind of man strangers want to befriend. Eventually, you reach the village from the map. It's nestled in a snow-choked valley, the kind of place with one well, 2 taverns, and more secrets than horses. You arrive just before dusk, your breath a ribbon of steam, your cloak rimmed with frost. The town feels wrong, not loud, not tense, just quiet in that too perfect way. No children playing, no dogs barking, no drunks stumbling from a fire-lit doorway. You don't like it. You stop at the inn, but you don't go in. Instead, you circle the outer edge of town, watching, counting windows, marking exits, listening. You find signs of her, not obvious, not to anyone else, but to you. They're clear. A split fence post that shouldn't be there. A bit of red thread tied around the handle of a shutter. A chalk mark beneath the cornerstone of the well. She's alive, and she's trying to leave a trail. That night, you don't sleep. You crouch in the snow behind a butcher's shed, wrapped in your cloak muscles coiled like rope, watching, waiting, and just before midnight, you see him, tall, broad, wrong, a man moving too quietly for someone supposed to be here. You clock the blade beneath his coat, the way his eyes scan the shadow, not the snow. He's not a local. He's not alone. And he's not hunting deer. He's here for her. You follow, not close, just enough to shadow the shadow. He heads toward the northern edge of town where the houses grow sparse and crooked. Then he stops, waits. A second figure joins him, then a third. They speak in murmurs you can't hear. But you know the language: contracts, surveillance, containment. The vocabulary of people who don't ask for names, only proof. They're not amateurs. You slip away before they scatter. She's not safe. Mainstream history often leaves out the rescues that don't involve cavalry or trumpet blasts. But in the margins and faded footnotes and local myths, there are stories of women who vanished, then reappeared with no memory of chains, of strangers who came through snow and left only footprints, of old debts repaid in silence. Historians still argue whether these events were coincidence, divine intervention, or the work of men who once lived in shadow and refused to let others fall into it. You find the cellar at dawn, a small building, abandoned, roof caved, but the floorboards are clean, new nails in old wood. You tap once, then twice, then pause. A moment later, a single knock returns. You kneel and whisper her name. The board lifts. Eleanor. She looks thinner, paler, but her eyes are sharp. Her hands steady. About time, she says. You grin. You look terrible. She snorts. So do you. You help her out. She leans heavily on you but doesn't collapse. She still has fire in her. How many, you ask? 3 that I know of, she says. But Marcus might have sent more. You nod. He didn't send me. She smiles, and for a moment it's like nothing ever changed. But it did. You help her into the woods. There's a path she scouted weeks ago, half buried, half frozen, but clear enough for 2 people who know how to disappear. You ready, you ask. She doesn't answer. She just starts walking, and you follow, not to protect her, but to walk beside her, because sometimes the best thing a killer can do is help someone else survive. The forest swallows you both without ceremony. The trees are thick and heavy with snow, their limbs drooping like old men leaning on canes. You move through them in silence, boots crunching in slow rhythm breath, sharp and visible in the cold morning air. Eleanor keeps pace, barely. She's limping badly, but refuses your help beyond a shoulder to lean on when the path gets steep. Whatever they did to her, it didn't break her, but it bruised something, and bruises take time. You don't ask what happened. She doesn't volunteer, because between people like you, the story is always understood in what's not said. The wince when bending down, the stiffness in the walk, the eyes that never stop scanning the edges of the world. You're the same. Different wounds, same ghosts. By midday, you've put enough distance between yourselves and the village to feel the tension ease. A little, but not enough to stop. You rest beneath a pine thicket, covered from above, invisible from 3 directions. Eleanor eats a crust of bread like it's a feast. You sip from a flask of water that tastes faintly of old leather. I didn't think you'd come, she says finally. I almost didn't. What changed? You glance at her. You asked. She smiles at that, then frowns. They'll keep looking, especially if they know you're with me. I know you're not curious what I did to make Marcus come after me again. No, but you should be. You stare out through the trees watching a bird hop along a branch, shaking snow like feathers from a blanket. If you want to tell me, I'll listen, you say. If not, I'll still walk with you. She looks at you for a long time, then says, I stole a name. You blink. A name, a ledger. Names of nobles laundering silver through the northern provinces. Marcus was on it. So were a dozen others. You still have it. She shakes her head. Not anymore. But I think he thinks I do. You nod slowly. That would do it. She chuckles once bitter. They were careful too, but they underestimated how many cooks they have in their kitchens. I just had to talk to the right steward with the wrong conscience. Mainstream records often bury these kinds of acts beneath the surface of grander events, wars, treaties, disasters. But historians sometimes find traces, ledgers, that don't add up sudden disappearances of minor lords or abrupt shifts in trade routes. Some scholars refer to it as the shadow trade, the quiet flow of influence that only becomes visible when someone pulls too hard on the wrong thread. Historians still argue whether these disruptions were accidents, uprisings, or carefully aimed truths hurled by the invisible hands of people like Eleanor. You break camp as the sun begins to lower. Tonight, you won't risk a fire. Too close still. Too visible. You walk for another 3 hours before settling into a shallow cave half hidden by a tangle of roots. Dry, sheltered, perfect. Eleanor's asleep within minutes. Her breath soft, her face slack in the rare calm of exhaustion. You don't sleep. You sharpen a stick, watch the stars, and listen to the way the wind plays tricks on your hearing. You think about the orchard. You think about the fire and the chickens and the farmer who didn't ask questions but gave you a place anyway. You think about the letter you never sent and the one you did. This life, this second life, has never asked for payment. But now, you feel the cost. You could have stayed. You could have never come. But if you hadn't, she'd be gone. And you know, deep in the cold place inside you that never stops watching the dark, that the world doesn't need fewer killers. It needs more people willing to stop being one. You check the path once more. You lie down back to the wall and let the darkness come, not with fear, but with resolve, because you've already made your choice, and there's no going back now. Morning arrives slow and pale. The sky is a dull gray, the kind that makes even shadows seem hesitant to stretch. You wake before Eleanor, watching her sleep beneath a blanket that's too thin to keep out the cold. You pack quietly, folding the map, securing your belongings, and checking the paths ahead. The forest is still, no birdsong, no rustle of small creatures, just the distant drip of melting ice. You glance over at Eleanor. Her eyes flutter open. "Where are we?" she asks, voice hoarse. "Far enough, you say." She nods, swallows hard. You both know the danger isn't over. You move with deliberate caution, retracing steps you memorized from before heading toward a ridge that overlooks a valley wide enough to swallow secrets whole. You stop at a rocky outcrop, looking down at the thin line of road twisting through the trees. Figures move along it, 3, maybe 4. Too many. You count the intervals between their steps. Professional. Prepared. They don't know you're watching. Not yet. You step back into the trees. This way, you say. You lead Eleanor through tangled underbrush away from the main road toward a creek where you can cross unseen. Her breath comes in short bursts. You pause. "Can you walk without me?" you ask. She looks at you. Maybe she replies. You take her arm gently. "Good," you say, "because I'm not letting you out of my sight." You cross the creek silently, the cold biting at your ankles, but you don't stop. You move toward a small village tucked between hills, one where you have a friend, someone who owes you, someone who asks no questions. That's where you plan to hide for a while, maybe longer, maybe forever. Mainstream histories often overlook the networks of refuge that sustain people like you. Safe houses, sympathetic villages, forgotten routes through hills and forests, all vital to survival. Some scholars have pieced together these secret roads from old letters maps and oral traditions, calling them the veil paths. Historians still debate how organized they were, or if they were simply the spontaneous choices of countless people refusing to vanish quietly. You arrive at the village just as twilight turns the sky soft purple. Your friend meets you at the edge, no questions, just a nod and a worn cloak. You bring Eleanor inside. The village breathes easy, and for the first time in weeks, you allow yourself to believe. Not in safety, but in sanctuary. The village is a patchwork of stone cottages and winding lanes surrounded by thick forests that seem to hold their breath as you pass. Here the world feels slower, less demanding, less dangerous. You settle Eleanor into a small room warmed by a peat stove. The friend who welcomed you, an older man with a steady gaze and hands like weathered leather, brings food and water without questions. That's the kind of trust you don't find easily anymore. You spend days helping around the village, fixing tools, carrying water, and keeping watch. The villagers accept Eleanor, quietly offering smiles and nods, but no prying eyes. For them, Survival is a shared secret, and strangers are guests to be protected. At night, you sit outside the cottage, listening to the wind through the pines, and feel something unfamiliar hope. You talk little. Words feel heavy, unnecessary. But when Eleanor speaks, her voice is stronger. I want to go back, she says one evening, staring at the stars. You don't answer immediately. Not here, she clarifies. To the city, to finish what I started. You nod slowly. You're brave, you say, or reckless. She smiles. Maybe both. You think about Marcus, about the hunters still out there, about the ledger that could topple kings. But you also think about the orchard, the firelight, the man you've become or are becoming. Whatever happens, you say you won't face it alone. She reaches out, and for the first time in a long while, you let her take your hand. Mainstream history focuses on battles and politics, but the real stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet resistance live in the spaces between. There are accounts of villages that sheltered fugitives, women who ran messages through forests, and men who risked everything to protect those who couldn't fight. Historians still argue how much impact these acts had, but to those who lived them, they were everything. The path ahead is uncertain, but for now, you have a purpose together, and that makes all the difference. Preparation is slow, methodical. You and Eleanor gather supplies, study the map, and plan your route back to the city, not as hunters, but as ghosts. You avoid the main roads, stick to forest paths and old trading routes. Move at dawn and dusk when shadows blend with the mist. You're careful, more careful than you've ever been. Because this time, the stakes are higher. You know Marcus's reach has tightened. You know the men he sends don't ask questions. You don't expect mercy, but you do expect resolve. One evening, as you camp beside a quiet stream, Eleanor breaks the silence. Why do you keep going? She asks. You consider it. Because sometimes you say the only way to survive is to keep fighting. She nods. You were always better at that, she says. You smile. Maybe the night deepens around you. Stars blink awake. The river murmurs its endless song. You feel something inside settle. Not peace, but purpose. You're ready. Mainstream chronicles rarely detail the quiet moments before a reckoning, the plans, the fears, the second guesses. But these moments shape everything. Some historians piece together these preludes from letters, intercepted messages, and cryptic accounts of missing couriers. They still argue whether these fragments can ever tell the whole story, or if some secrets are meant to stay hidden. You and Eleanor rise with the dawn. The path is long, the future uncertain, but your resolve is clear. You move forward. Together, the city looms as you approach the same stone walls, the same crooked streets. But everything feels different. The shadows no longer swallow you whole. The alleys don't whisper threats. The air holds a cautious welcome. You and Eleanor move like specters through the crowd, blending, observing, preparing. Marcus's estate still stands, but his grip has loosened. Whispers of unrest ripple through the noble houses. Your presence is no longer a secret, but neither is your resolve. You watch the sunset from a rooftop, the sky bleeding gold and crimson. Eleanor stands beside you, her breath a soft cloud in the cool air. Whatever comes next, she says, we face it together. You nod, because for the first time you believe it. The fight isn't over, but it's no longer just survival. It's justice, and maybe, just maybe, redemption. The city exhales, the night deepens, and you step into the darkness, not as a shadow, but as a light. The night stretches wide and still around you. The cold air wraps gently like a soft blanket, and the distant sounds of the city slow into a lullaby just for you. You've traveled far through shadow and silence, through fear and courage, and now here you are safe, if only for this moment. Let the tension unwind. Let the heavy thoughts settle like dust on an old shelf. There is peace in knowing that even the darkest paths can lead to quiet fields and the warmth of a fire. You've seen the shadows up close, felt their chill, but tonight you're beyond them. Breathe deeply. Feel the slow rise and fall of your chest, the gentle hum of life carrying you forward. The story isn't about the knives or the fear. It's about what happens after the choice is made in silence, the courage to keep moving, and the hope that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. So let yourself rest. Let your mind drift softly like leaves floating on a calm river. The past is a distant shore, the future a whisper waiting to be heard. Tonight, you are here now, safe and ready for the dreams that will carry you gently through the hours. Thank you for traveling this journey. May your sleep be deep, your heart light, and your dreams filled with quiet strength. Good night. Sweet dreams.